Hello, everyone. That's great, thank you. Hi, welcome. Welcome to the 85% done brand new Arts Cafe. And this is actually our first RealArts program in here. And if you're not familiar, RealArts is a program where Anthony DeCurtis, esteemed professor, helps connect us to people working in journalism, media, and the arts. And we're so grateful to have him here doing this kind of work for us. We have, I think, 2 or 3 programs a semester. If you want to know more about those kinds of programs and more about the programming we do generally, you should sign our guest book out there, pick up a copy of our calendar so you can stay connected to our programs. We're really excited to have Alex Koppelman back here, and I'm going to let Anthony do a full, beautiful introduction, but I just wanted to give a quick round of applause for Anthony for setting this up. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ellie, and thank you all. Alex just sat in on my arts and popular culture class. I couldn't be more delighted than to have Alex back. He's not only was a great student when he was a student of mine, but has been a very devoted kind of Penn citizen, has been extremely helpful to students in my courses. I live in New York City, and whenever students graduate and come my way and seek out my help, Alex is always the next stop, and has been very generous with his time and his knowledge. Alex has had a distinguished career since he left Penn. Among the places he's worked are the New Yorker, the Guardian U.S., and he's now at CNN, where he helps oversee business and media coverage. And Alex is somebody that, even, again, when he was a student here, when he was editor of 34th Street, had a kind of, just always had a smart perspective on the media environment. And, media not only is something that kind of brings us the world around us, but has been a subject itself, as I'm sure you know. And CNN is very central in that regard. So for personal reasons and professional reasons, I'm so happy to have Alex Koppelman here today.
Thank you.
Well, Alex, let's just start with certainly, I think about the questions I would ask if I were coming to something like this. And, I think any time anybody these days hears the words, the letters CNN, they think about chants at Trump rallies and bombs being sent to media organizations and, that kind of targeting that makes, the idea of going to work on a day-to-day basis, I think, probably pretty charged, also pretty exciting. We talked about it a bit in class, but I wonder if you could, address that and how it impacts what you do and what the organization as a whole does.
Sure. I think the environment, in many ways, is just a reminder of how important what we do is, and also how responsible we have to be in doing it. Anytime we make a mistake, we're upfront about making that mistake. We publish corrections. We say we made a mistake. Here's the error we made. Here's what went wrong. Here's the fact. And that sort of basic ethical principle of journalism can get used against you. It gets turned from this is what you do as a responsible news organization into look at what they get wrong. So it's a reminder that you're always careful about the facts. You're always careful about the work you do. You always want to get it right and do the best possible story you can. But it's a reminder that right now there's a microscope, and we have to get it right. And I think one thing that people and maybe this is something we have to do better, or that all of journalism has to do better, is we don't give a glimpse behind the scenes sometimes to the work that we do to get it right. You know, if you just turn on CNN, you don't appreciate necessarily how much work has gone into what you're seeing there. And we talk a lot about we don't necessarily want to be the first to get the story. We want to be the first to get it right. And if that means that we're a little slow to it, we're okay with that. I mean, we're not super okay with that, but we want to get it right. There was a great Village Voice reporter who died a couple of years ago, shortly after I started at CNN when I was the media editor. And the New York Times quoted his wife as saying he was dead. And I was not allowed to run with it because we didn't have it ourselves. So for an hour, I couldn't publish the story that we had written and had ready because my bosses said, no, you don't have it. And if CNN kills somebody, they're really dead. And that's, you know, and that was just an obit. And when you're then dealing with stories about politics, about the country, you know, it's even. I don't want to say it's even more important because it's important to get any story you're doing right, even if it's the smallest subject. But yeah, there's always a reminder that there's a microscope on us.
You know, I mean, journalists are famous for, you know, kind of whistling past the graveyard and for graveyard humor. And, you know, obviously, you know, you mentioned in class, and I'm sure everybody here knows, you know, CNN was evacuated last week. You know, can you talk a little bit about, you know, what that experience was like because of a bomb that was sent? And I think they found another bomb that maybe was on its way.
Yeah, on its way to Atlanta. You know, it's not. It is a little scary, and I'm probably a little blasé about it. But at the same time, for me at least, I live in New York City, and I, you know, I said to somebody who was asking me about it, you can't, if you worry about the worst case all the time, you can't live in New York City. I mean, it's a target for all sorts of things, not to mention the next time a Hurricane Sandy comes and the bridges go down or whatever, like, it's just, you sort of have to, or you could, for example, not that this has happened to me, though it did 5 years ago, you could be crossing the street and get hit by a cab. So to a certain extent, you just sort of have to decide that you need to take it seriously, you need to be careful, you need to be safe. But you also need to accept that this comes with it and decide whether you're going to live your life afraid. And I think that extends to whether you're in journalism under threat or almost anything you do. And again, in journalism, you know, to some extent, it's a reminder of how important the work we do is. And there's a picture of me on Twitter from somebody I work with, showing me with my laptop out and on the phone after we had left the building, and it's because there was a story there, and I needed to know what needed to get done because we still have to report, and you don't, you know, we're not the only newsroom that has had to do that. The Capital Gazette had to do that, and that's the deal. The news doesn't stop, and your responsibility to report it doesn't stop.
You know, one of the, you know, you mentioned the issue, I mean, obviously, especially with the amount of news given social media and, you know, a kind of endless news cycle, you know, it's impossible not to make mistakes. But I wonder, you know, if you can put your interpretive cap on for a minute and, you know, talk a little bit about the kind of unforgiving quality that, you know, obviously, I mean, the New York Times forever had its, you know, little section of, you know, errata, and, you know, everybody has to deal with that. You know, I wrote a book that came out last year, you know, it came out in paperback. We went through a bunch of things that readers and other people, in the course of those editions, pointed out that were factually incorrect, and I dutifully corrected them all. And and you always do your best, but there seems to be a kind of a search for the worst motive, a sense that, like, not simply that it's a mistake, but that mistake somehow had intent behind it. And there's an unforgiving quality. Anybody who looks at the comments section on and virtually any online site, quickly learns that even the most innocent mistake gets pilloried. And I wonder if do you have a take on that? Like, what's that about?
That's an interesting question. I think one of the things you said is right, which is it's a lot of times we sort of forget about Occam's razor and assume that there's intent to a mistake rather than just people screw up. And in a partisan environment, it gets amplified. At the same time, so my mother was a prosecutor in Baltimore, and would read stories about her office and say, "Oh, they got all this wrong," or once I became a reporter, I remember a big moment for me was realizing that I had done a story right, and the New York Times got it wrong. And it was a big moment for me, both in that it felt good to know that I was getting it right and they were getting it wrong, but it was also that, oh God, the New York Times gets stories really wrong. And they're human too thing. And I think what I'm leading to is I think it happens in politics now, but it also happens with any story that people really care about. You start noticing things that are either actually wrong or just not the way you see it, even if they're right. And it turns from this is an honest mistake or this is an honest difference of seeing it into, oh, well, you can't trust them. They did it. They're bad. They got it wrong on purpose, whatever it is. But I think, I think the way this is slightly off topic, but I think also there's not a problem yet, but I think we're coming up on a problem in journalism in that there used to be more magazines, and magazines fact-check stuff. And that meant that there were a lot of entry-level jobs in fact-checking that there aren't anymore. And I really think that is just a key entry-level job because it helps you understand whether you're then become a reporter or an editor, that every word has to be thought of separately as its own individual fact, and every word has to be checked. Every word is its own individual fact, and then you need to think of the words together and whether they make the facts, whether once you put them together, that's wrong. It's a whole different way of thinking and looking closely at it that I think is a skill that is not being given to enough people anymore, and I think we're going to run into some trouble there. And I think, again, the solution is that we have to get better about it, and we have to tell people what we do so that they understand what we do. I also think, not to keep rambling, but...
No, not at all.
So there, when they do polls on Congress, everybody hates Congress. Everybody hates Congress. But then when you ask people, what do you think about your member of Congress? Oh, they're pretty good. It's the faceless Congress they don't like. And it's the same thing for the media. Nobody likes the media. But when you ask, oh, do you like the paper you subscribe to? Yeah, no, it's really good. I love their sports section. I like Anderson Cooper a lot, whatever it is. And so I think that is part of the reaction that people have too. They see articles from, in part because of the internet, in part because we've lost so many local outlets. They see articles from places they don't have the same connection to. And so it's easier to blame that faceless thing that you just happened to be reading for the first time, or that thing that feels far away from you, where you'd have a connection to your local paper and understand, oh, they just screwed up.
What is it like? I mean, I realize you're not on the politics beat, but still, I imagine that at a moment like this, at a place like CNN, it's kind of all hands on deck. And I wonder if you could just talk about that a little bit. With the, you know, as you may know, we have an election coming up next week, and you know, a lot of people are watching, you know, CNN and the news channels, you know, very carefully. You know, what's it like to be in there while this is going on? You know, could you talk about that a bit?
I mean, it's always fun to be where the action is and to know that people turn to you. For me, it also means that I have to be careful because I sit right by an open air studio in our New York office, and I forget that as I walk past, I can often accidentally be on camera, and I'm usually either eating something or just like slouching and looking terrible, and I forget that there are 700,000 people or 1 million people watching. So, yeah, it's just, it's an interesting time to be at any news organization, I think. And I think what it has also meant is because of this news cycle, you know, even divorced from the midterms for a minute, because this news cycle never ends, people are always reading it and are always interested and always want to hear more about it. And that's kind of a fun time to be a journalist because it means more people care about what you're doing.
Can you talk about your time here at 34th Street and its impact on your current work and subsequent career?
Yeah. It's quite different from what I do now. 34th Street, for those of you who don't know, is sort of or at least it was when I was here, is combination arts and entertainment / humor. I used to write, when I was editor-in-chief, I would write a column every week, and my mother would call me, I guess the day the paper came out, because she subscribed, but it would be mailed to her, and say, so what's in your column this week? And what she meant was, in what way are you going to embarrass me this week? What have you said that I'm going to cringe when I read it? But at the same time, so there was an anniversary of it recently, and some various alums were sending around articles that they found, and I showed one of them to my wife, who read it and first of all started cracking up, which I was very proud of because I knew she did not want to give me the satisfaction of knowing that it was that she thought it was funny. But then also she pointed out that my voice as a writer has not changed in 15 years, which I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, or guess I was telling dad jokes as a 21-year-old. It had an influence in that I learned what it was like to do journalism in a way that I think you can't learn just by being in a classroom. Not, of course, that being in a classroom
Certainly
about it was not.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's just like having to do it. And
well, I always sort of thought about my class as almost a kind of extension of 34th Street in some way. Although
Yeah.
that wasn't true back then because that was pretty early on when I was here. But
Yeah. I mean, there are plenty of 34th Street articles that came out of one writing class or another that, you know, you see a feature piece that it was like, that was written for a class. And also in the same way, you know, you're going out and doing it, and then you're going back and learning about what you did and how to make it better. But yeah, I think actually having to do it and think about how to get it done certainly helps. Thinking about the impact that this is going to have when it is published, and also having the experience of knowing that people will talk to you in a way that when you say, I'm writing this for a thing that is actually published versus I'm writing this for a class, makes a difference. Yeah. But also, I think if you look at the people who've come out of 34th Street in the Daily Pennsylvanian, you see it really is it's a really good environment for learning how to do this.
What can you talk a bit about, obviously, I mean, as time has gone on, the degree of kind of managerial things that you've had to take on, the amount of writing I would assume that you are still able to do is probably less than it had been in the past, and maybe less than you would want it to be. You always kind of thought like an editor, and in fact, we're an editor here. So, talk about just the interplay of those things in your current work.
So I don't write at all anymore, and and there are some editors who really miss it, and I don't. I think for two reasons. One is I think I'm a fine writer. I think I'm a really good editor, but just a fine writer. And I think it's an important distinction, or important to know that about yourself. But also, I like the experience. I like what comes with editing, which is the collaboration, and in a lot of ways, I think it's actually like teaching. You're working with somebody to make not just a single article better, but all their articles after that, and you really do see the progression with a lot of reporters as they get better and they do different things and they learn how to do different things or more things. And I enjoy that. I also now have to manage a lot more, which means a lot more meetings, unfortunately, and actually less editing. But that's sort of the way it goes. And then the other reason I don't write as much is, honestly, I'm sort of precious as a writer. So rather than, I work with Brian Stelter, who hosts Reliable Sources on CNN, and I mean, the man is just a machine. Like, I have watched him write a 600, 800 word article while he's on set in about 10 minutes, and it comes in and it's perfect. And it would have taken me hours, and I would have labored over every sentence. And you just, at a certain point, you don't have time to do that. And I'm sort of okay. There are times when I think, I could write this and it would be good. And I have something I would like to say, but I'm also okay not doing that. The only thing you miss out on as an editor is, and it sort of goes away after you've been doing it for a couple of years, is initially I had that feeling of an article is getting praise, and you wanna say, but wait, I wrote that. This brilliant line, everybody's saying, oh my God, I can't believe this writer wrote that. You're saying, no, that was me. I did that. But you get, that's part of the job, and you get over it.
Obviously, working in breaking news and, just trying to stay on top of, the beats that you're covering is, a kind of grueling job. I mean, it's a lot of work. What things, I know the kind of short answer in a sense is everything, but, what are the things that you pay attention to kind of keep your own kind of story sense fresh, and, to kind of, just make sure that, as much as you can, that, you have a full and kind of fertile picture of, what's happening at any particular moment?
So I think, honestly, much of the answer is just Twitter, and making sure that you're following an interesting selection of people who are going to share interesting articles that you can read and just keep in the back of your head. It's also, I read the New York Times on my subway ride, and it takes me an hour to get to work, so got plenty of time to read the Times, and then also Twitter. But it's also, so I was a political blogger for a few years, and I think one of the things that was helpful was, even as I was writing a ton every day, what I learned is that just to read a lot, because you never know when something that you read 6 months ago and sort of stuck way back in the back of your memory, all of a sudden another story comes out and you think, oh, if you just connect these two things, you've got a whole new idea here. You've got a whole new avenue of reporting to send a reporter down. And you think about that. The other thing I've been trying to do recently, somebody did a really good piece shortly after we were purchased, shortly after the deal with AT&T buying Time Warner, our parent company, was done or was approved by a judge. There was an extra $1 or $1.99 added to AT&T bills, and somebody noticed that. Or if they got tipped to it, then we'll just pretend they noticed it, and did a really smart story. This $1 or $1.99 charge that most people will never notice on their bills adds up to like a billion extra dollars for AT&T that they could use because they just spent all this money on us. So actually, it's not at all having to do with reading the news, but one thing I've been trying to do a little more, especially as I've moved into business coverage, is think about what is on my receipts and in my bills that I would never notice, and that is just a little thing like that if you just think about it for an extra second, could actually be a really interesting story.
Colin Jost on SNL did a funny, little take on, like, going through like the number of various things that, just, subscribe, and then if you don't like it, just like, you can cancel at any time, and sort of going through on a monthly basis the number of things that he was paying that he thought he would do that, and 5 years have gone by.
Yep.
So yeah, there's probably lots of stories there. What what makes you the most excited about your job? I mean, what are the big wins? What are the the high points? What constitutes a success?
I think it varies day to day. You always want the article that you feel like has made an impact, that has changed things in some way. And we've done a few that I'm really proud of. We did, one of my reporters broke a story about women who accused Mark Halperin of sexual harassment and sexual assault, and he is no longer working in journalism right now. And I was proud of that story. I remain proud of that story because a lot of women got to tell a story that they had not felt like they could tell for a long time. We've done a lot of work on social media and the problems with Facebook and Twitter and Russian trolls and fake news, misinformation, all of that stuff. And I'm always proud of that because we're sort of doing the work that they're not, and that they should be, and it actually does make a tangible difference. But also I'm, even on stories that as an editor, even on stories that are never going to have that impact, I'm happy when when I feel like I have helped a reporter tell a story a little better than they would have otherwise, or see an angle that they wouldn't have otherwise, or make an extra couple calls that they wouldn't have thought to make, or that I saw, or that they had everything there and just didn't quite realize how to tell the story in the right way. And I help them move the puzzle pieces around and just make the story better. And if they go home feeling proud of that story, then I'm happy. as long as I learned in a previous job, or I realized in a previous job where I wasn't particularly happy, that the thing that bothered me wasn't that I was working so much, because I was working a lot, but that I was going home at the end of a 10-hour, 12-hour, 14-hour, whatever day, and didn't feel like I had done good work, like we had published things that I was proud of. And what really matters to me is that we do that good work and that we publish things that I'm proud of, and as long as we do that, I'm happy and I'm excited about the next day.
I'm going to open the floor to questions or comments or ideas. If anybody has some for Alex, yes?
Hi, thank you for coming to speak today. I was wondering if in what you do at CNN, if we talk about that as a representation of like big media or TV media, if there's an awareness or like a pressure or a concern about YouTube news or like Twitter news or Instagram news or even late night comedy news, where a lot of young people are preferring to get their news these days?
Yeah, I think for all news outlets, there's a concern. Audiences are getting older and not, and people are cutting the cord and not subscribing to cable, which is a problem for us. People are not subscribing to newspapers or print magazines. It's a concern. And what we try to do is meet people where they are. The problem with that is that you don't get paid for that as well as you would if it was running on your own site, and that's been a problem for every news outlet. It's a concern. It's something we all have to think about, and it's not going well so far, but hopefully we're going to figure it out soon.
Thank you so much for coming this evening. It was wonderful. Can you tell us, please, what was your road that you took to get to CNN?
So it was I've had a few jobs, and it's a lot of twists and turns in a way that I was actually saying to Anthony's class before that was helpful, in that there are a lot of editors who do one thing well, and because I've had a few different kinds of jobs, I do a few things well, which is really helpful to me. What I was saying to Anthony's class is there are a lot of editors who can do either breaking news or do features. They're very different. Editing something that's 100 words long and getting it up in 2 minutes is a lot different than editing something that's 3,000 words long and that your reporter has been working on for 2 months. And it's not easy to be able to do both, and it's not that I'm particularly great or anything. It's that I've had jobs where I've had to do one or the other or both, and as a result, I can do both, and that's been very helpful to me. The road really starts at Penn, though, both because I learned how to do journalism here, and because I got one of my first jobs out of college from having met somebody, an alumna, whatever the word is.
Alumnus.
Thank you.
Your Male,
Latin.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, your Latin is better than mine.
It's a Catholic school.
There you go. Quaker school, they didn't teach us so much. Well, you could have, but I did not take Latin. I had met an alumnus, both of Penn and the Daily Pennsylvanian, and sent him an email, and he said, "Come on in," and somehow I ended up with a job. And literally everything that has happened to me in my career started there, because that's where I met an editor who took me with him to my next job. Yeah.
Do you wait for most stories to come to you, or does CNN, they'll see something happening? With me, it's one of my pet things, gun control, and say, well, we don't want to step on this. But we're just going to drop this story. Florida, we dropped this one, we drop. Or you look and say, you know something, I think it's time to make a statement and saying, where is this coming from? Why is it going on? And it's a trouble to say, I look at it and say, I said, but how much is a human life worth? Well, apparently a human life is worth how much money the gun lobby gives to different congressmen to make sure that they don't pass gun control. And it's so obvious out there, and yet you don't see anyone picking it up and saying, let us discuss this further. Is it true, not true? Is it have validity? Or is this something that actually, we may actually say may have reason to, and merit to follow through?
So we don't take positions like that. What we do, I think we recognize that the news cycle right now moves incredibly fast. I mean, just incredibly fast. And it feels like a day is what used to be a week or a month or a year at this point. And we have to cover that as it happens. But we also try very hard to make sure that we don't leave stories behind and that we come back to stories and keep telling them. For example, we had reporters in Puerto Rico for a long time after the hurricane. It's a balancing act. It's a tough balancing act, but we are trying very hard to both cover the day's news and to step back and think about what issues have fallen out of the news but still need to be covered, and to make sure those are still covered.
Anyone? Yes.
Just a quick question. Have you worked in like opinion articles or editorials?
I have not worked on an opinion page or anything like that. When I worked at the New Yorker, we ran essays that were pretty opinionated. Yeah.
Was there a specific question that you had about that type of work, or?
Yeah. Just like, I guess how, obviously, other than the fact that it's opinionated, what would you say is different about the thought process which goes into a regular article versus, say, opinion editorial?
So I think it depends who's writing them. I think the best opinion pieces involve some kind of reporting or research, the same way a news story does. And I think when you see bad opinion pieces, it's because the person just typed their thoughts down on paper and didn't bother to think about, is this right? Who do I call to make sure that I'm right? What statistics can I check? What data can I check? What experts have written about this before, and question their own beliefs that way. I think in the actual writing of it, to some extent, depending on what kind of news article you're writing, they're similar in some ways. I was talking about this in Anthony's class, that one of the classes I took here that I have found most useful to me as an editor is one that taught people how to be tutors in the writing center, which basically taught you how to help somebody write an argumentative essay. Almost the 5-paragraph essay that you had to write in high school, and it is about figuring out what's the point, and in an opinion piece, that's what's the argument you want to make. In a news article, the way I often sum it up for a reporter who's having a little trouble structuring a story or figuring out how they want to tell it is, what's the one or two sentences if you're at a bar with a friend or if you were emailing your mom, give me the 1 or 2 sentences that you would use to tell them about this story. And once you have those, that's the point of your story, in the same way that there's a point to the opinion piece, and then everything should be built around that, making sure that point comes through, making sure that you're mustering all of your reporting that shows that goes to this point. And even if that point is nobody knows, you still have to pull together everything that makes sense, and then also think about you need to take out all the stuff that doesn't belong. So in that way, I think they're similar.
Yes.
You described
Just one sec, because we're recording, it's better to use the microphone.
Can you describe the difference between MSNBC and CNN? Where does it take off in one direction, the other one go in a different direction? Is there any bond between the two stations? Do you ever use each other in any respect, some sort or another?
Well, the difference, of course, is that we're better. No, I think, CNN is a news outlet, I think, unlike almost any other, in the power of how many journalists we have, and the fact that we're all over the world. And NBC certainly has a lot of reporters, but almost nobody can match what we're able to do, and I think that differentiates. And I'm not putting MSNBC down there. But they do a more opinionated, from a liberal perspective thing, and what we do, not to be corny, but our marketing campaign slogan right now is facts first, and that really is, we start out with our reporting, and it's why when there's a hurricane, people turn on CNN, because they know that we'll get you the news and we'll be there, and so will the other networks, but we're just it's CNN. It's what you turn on for breaking news, because we're there, and we it's what we do, and we're really good at it.
Yes.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the difference between CNN and The New Yorker, and just kind of magazine journalism and faster reporting like that, and why
Sure.
you left The New Yorker and maybe like CNN a little more.
Sure. Well, I was on the website for The New Yorker. So in some ways, they're actually more similar than it would have been if I was working on the magazine, because we were still responding to the day's news. They're different in that, again, CNN is a breaking news organization. The New Yorker has actually been breaking some amazing news recently with Ronan Farrow's stuff, but they're not. It's not something they're doing in-depth reporting for a long time, which we do as well, and a lot of it. But we also do. This thing just happened. We need an article out in 2 minutes. We need to get it on air in 2 minutes, and we also need to, in those 2 minutes, we need to make sure it's right, and that's really fast. It's a lot of adrenaline. It's a lot of fun, but it's much different than working on an article that's 1,000 words, and that is more of an opinion about a take on the day's news. They're very different. They're both great in their own way. And it's, at both of them, what's nice is you get to work with really talented people who are really good reporters. And you sometimes forget, I've been at places where that wasn't as much the case, and you forget what it's like sometimes to work with people who are that good. And it's a great experience when you do it.
Maybe we have a time for one more. We're going to have a little reception, so you can, speak more casually. Oh, well, we're being pretty casual here. But while you're having a drink and a piece of cheese, you can also chat with Alex. But let me just ask, unless there's a final question here. Looking ahead, I mean, kind of both for yourself and for the media scene, what would you like to be doing? What kind of things do you see in the offing, just more generally? What's your, shake the crystal ball a little bit and see what you can come up with?
For myself, I'm pretty happy where I am. I think what's nice about my job right now, besides the fact that I really like my colleagues and I like the work that I do, is I've got a balance where I still get to edit articles. Whereas if you go a little higher up in management, you have to just like manage all day, which isn't as fun. It's that problem of once you get really good at a job, you don't
Get to do it anymore. Yeah, right.
Yeah. And I just really like editing. And I would be sad if I didn't get to do it. And if I was in meetings all day instead. That might change in 10 years. I might say, I'm willing to put that aside to have a different job, or to have a job where I know that I'm done at 5 and I can go home, which is not the case right now. I go home and I know that I'm still going to get emails if there's breaking news, and I'm going to need to open my laptop back up, which, I like to pretend I don't like to do, but I think if I was being honest, and certainly my wife would tell you that I like it, and I'm sort of addicted to the adrenaline of there's breaking news, gotta go. As for the media itself or overall, if I had any idea, I would probably be off starting the killer idea right now and making a ton of money. I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting. So when I took the job as media editor at CNN, I did it in part because what I was thinking was the last time I had covered media, it was also a year where there had been a lot of layoffs, but it was a time when there were a lot of layoffs, and there were a lot of layoffs. It was bad. And now it feels like people are trying something and doing something different. And I think we don't know which of those ideas will work and which won't. But there are a lot of interesting things being done right now, and ways that people are trying to make up for the lost advertising revenue. I mean, just like the New York Times bought The Wirecutter, which is this review site, and CNN has its own similar thing, and so do other outlets now as well, where you make money through clicking, because people click the link of the thing that you've recommended. But it's really smart. It fits with what the Times does. It makes them some money, and personally, I now buy everything having read one of these review sites. It's watching that sort of thing. I don't know ultimately which one will be the one that will save us from the Facebook, Google advertising monopoly, but it's nice to see people trying it, and trying to figure out what the right way to go is. Where we end up in 5 or 10 years, I don't know. I think to counter all the exciting stuff, there are a lot of newspapers, and including some alt weeklies, that have been dying recently, not because the advertising environment was too bad, but because their owners are just terrible. And that's dispiriting to see, because it's hard to think about how we get those outlets back. And I'll be interested to see what solutions people come up with for making up for that local journalism we've lost. And I hope we see that again, but I don't know that I can tell you that I know which way it's going to end up.
Well, thanks to Alex Koppelman for coming here, and thanks to all of you for turning out. As I said, please join us for a drink and a bite in a minute, and Once again, thanks, Alex.